got a question, Councillor Wayne Walker?
Sure. I have a question about the issue that you raise around the health costs. We know that the ratepayer cost for spraying is maybe $1, $2 a year per ratepayer per year. In terms of health costs, what sort of costs examples could you give us that people in the community are facing as a consequence of this issue?
Well, I mean, I've got the own example of my poor little dog, the $400 on a drip just on one occasion. I've got another case of a person who lives opposite the East Coast Bay Service Centre there. Every time they spray the village green there, it took him years and years to find out exactly what was wrong with him, but he ends up having to go to Matt Tizard every time to be detoxed, and that is very expensive. That's a couple of $100 a pop. Now, if you multiply that by the hundreds and thousands of people all over the city, many who don't understand or even realise that they've actually been affected by it, and then, of course, you've got the ongoing costs. I mean, if you look at it, how our body copes...
Thank you. I think you've answered the question there. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tricia.
Are there any other questions? I'll move that we receive the documentation from Ms. Cheel and thank her for a presentation, seconded by Councillor Casey. Put that motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tricia.
Can I take those?
We now move to local board input. And the chair of the Hibiscus and Bays local board and Janet Fitzgerald is here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Janet Fitzgerald is here in her capacity of the chair of our Parks Committee, and thank you very much for accommodating our request to speak. We had actually organised a time slot on Councillor Walker's Environment, Climate Change and Natural Heritage Committee, and we're rather disappointed that that particular committee didn't go ahead because we wanted the opportunity to present that before the actual annual plan meeting that you held, which of course is past tense now. We're not going to be talking about transport today because that's not an area that we have any control over, but just to say Council does have control over that area because Councillor Webster's Finance and Performance Committee of course provides supply. So I think that that's possibly an area where you can address the issue that have been raised by some of the submitters today. Just to talk about it though, we were rather disappointed, in fact considerably disappointed as a local board when the decision was made at the last LTP plan time to actually lower the service standards. And so for our local board, we don't believe that we were properly consulted. We were told after the event that exactly what that reduction in budget meant. And for us, that meant changes in service standards with gardens, but also a change and a shift from mechanical edging to chemical spraying. And it's an issue that's caused a lot of concern in our particular area. We had, in your last annual plan submission process, over 200 submissions came from our local board area. We have had numerous requests from people living beside our parks to actually have mechanical edging reintroduced. The dollar sum that we were told to reinstate our service standards, which was just over $159,000, was well beyond our local board's parks budget, and we felt really concerned about that. We have tried to think laterally. We have talked to our community. We have looked at a policy that Kaipātiki Local Board has been pushing, which is to adopt a park, and we have spoken to some of the people who have shown concern about perhaps they're going into the parks to actually do the mechanical edging themselves. With the new health and safety legislation, that has opened up a total can of worms. You know, talking to the contractor, we have discussed with Grant Muir the possibility of their coming under the contractor's umbrella. It's not a really easy process. We believe that we should be allowed, as this new contract's coming into existence shortly, more flexibility as a local board. We've actually talked to a couple of our providers, in particular the Bays Youth Community Trust, about the possibility of a program where their NEET students could actually do the actual edging, and we would like to have that flexibility. Mr. Chairman, you know that when we were both on the North Shore City Council, and it wasn't actually a hard-fought battle, it was something that a great majority of council supported the idea of going away from chemicals. Not being chemically sensitive myself, I know a lot of people who are, and we actually felt that that was a higher service standard to achieve. And it's very interesting that Christchurch City Council is looking at moving in that direction. So we're here today to say, on behalf of the local boards, we were really concerned that when there was a drop in service standards, that we went to the lowest common denominator, which I was just talking to the chair of Manurewa. I was told, actually I believed that there was a consistent service standard through the Manukau City Council, but seemingly the actual lowest service standard was in Manurewa, and that was adopted across the whole region without, I don't believe, proper consultation with the communities about exactly what that lowering of 4 million actually meant. So I just implore, I'm not demanding, because I just don't believe that demanding actually works. We're requesting.
Okay,
We believe that local boards, Mr. Chairman, should have more flexibility when it comes to the contracting, and with a growth area like ours, it's really important that we can offer a standard of service that our communities actually want.
Thank you. Any questions, Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try and make it as succinct as possible. The differential in budget that was saved with going to mechanical edging across all of Auckland's local boards was 950,000 on the basis of the figures supplied. That works out as an average of 45,000 per local board on average. What's your view in terms of priority and service levels over the sums of money that are involved in going to chemicals as opposed to mechanical edging?
Well, that figure, and whether you can actually divide it by the number of boards, because ours covers a fairly extensive geographical area, really doesn't actually relate for us, because we were told for just the mechanical edging to be reintroduced was going to be 110,000. So there seems to be quite a deficit there in the figure that we were asked for compared to what you're suggesting, the actual
Mine's a
cost.
cumulative figure, and your one is 125,000 on the basis of the figures provided.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Cashmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Julie. So what we're looking here is a level of service over and beyond what is the regional's level of service for your local board. You're advocating for that. So would your community be prepared, and would your board be willing to accept a targeted rate to provide that?
No, we aren't, because we looked at our baseline. Our baseline provided that level of service, and then council made a decision to introduce the lowest possible baseline across the Auckland region, and we actually felt that that was unreasonable. In terms of rating, particularly our Bays local board area, in many areas, including my own property, we've seen rises around 30%. What concerns people more than anything else about the Auckland Council is actually the drop in service standards. People are prepared to accept the additional rates. They don't like it, but the service standards really concern them. And for such a small amount of money, $4 million.
You've answered the question, thank you. Councillor Walker, Wayne Walker, do you have a question?
Sure. Just in terms of the drop in service level, and assuming you're referring to the ugly scorched earth that we now have around the parks and the like, what sort of feedback have you had from people around that in terms of the aesthetics and so on? Do people like it?
People don't like the aesthetic look. Some people don't like the use of chemicals. But people were happy and satisfied with their previous service level.
Thank you. No other questions? I'll move that we thank the chair
Happy to second.
and the member from the Hibiscus Bay Local Board for the presentation, seconded by Councillor Wayne Walker. I'll put that motion.
Thank
Those
you
in
for coming.
favour?
Aye.
Against? Declare that carried. Now, the Mayor has asked for an input.
Yeah, Mr Chair, just a very brief comment, councillors, to acknowledge the submitters here today, and you recall they came through to the annual plan round and had quite a bit to say there. I assured them that this was the appropriate committee to come into. And the second thing that I gave them was my view that as the leader of the city, we've had a policy in place for 3 years, and it was robust, but it's timely to reflect on that policy. So, councillors, I will work with the chair in bringing through a review on the various parts and the application of that policy, and particularly reflecting on what Julia's had to say from a local board view. Some councillors have in particular highlighted one or two issues where we'll be looking for Dean and the Chief Executive Officer of Auckland Transport to respond, to give comfort or otherwise. This is not a matter that we will sit on our hands on. There's no reason why we shouldn't start straight in on this process to get one, clarity, and then secondly, just to review the way we go forward. I think it would be helpful. And look, most of the amalgamation of bylaws and policies has been effective, but one or two are going to take a little bit longer to tease out. So I would suggest to you that we would try to get something back in the next month. Councillor Wayne and Councillor John have been particularly focused on this issue. Very happy to work with them in shaping up the way forward.
Through you, Mr Chair.
Yes, Councillor.
I just seek some clarification, because my understanding is that the community at large doesn't have any issue with policy. We have a policy. It was well consulted on. It's actually the implementation that's the issue, what we're doing,
Yep.
not the policy.
Yeah.
It's the implementation that is the issue, and the massive increase in spraying that we have now under a policy that seeks to minimise it.
Councillor Walker, can you desist from making a major speech?
I'm just emphasising that it's implementation that is the issue, not policy.
You started off to ask a question and then you launched into a speech which seemed to become a tirade at the end, and I don't think that's helpful. I will ask Mr. Kimpton.
It's not a tirade.
I will ask Mr. Kimpton to just advise what he intends to do from here, notwithstanding the fact that you are on the Weed Management Advisory Group, so you know exactly what's going on, Councillor Walker. But Mr.
Well, I don't know exactly what's going on, Mr Chair.
Well,
So I can confirm that we have both a political advisory group responsible for weed management, and that's a collection of councillors around this table and local board chairs. And I can confirm we have a best practice technical reference group which looks at best practice when it comes to weed management. It considers all forms of weed management appropriate to the type of weed. In terms of the specific review that's been proposed, it has been agreed both at that group and it's proposed by the Mayor that we review the weed management policy. It is our objective to scope that review and bring it back by the end of August and bring a recommendation to this committee for the September meeting. So that's the process that's been proposed by the Mayor and accepted, and well, it's been adopted in terms of staff providing the implementation means for that.
thank you. No, Councillor Walker, there is no further discussion on this
Well, there was some
matter.
misleading information there, Mr Chair.
Order. The officer has given the information, and that's
It was
the
misleading.
That is the final say on this issue. Thank you. We'll now move to item